Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I am your host, Photo Joseph. We are here today with DxO to talk about the Nik Collection free inside of Lightroom Classic. We're actually going to bounce into Photoshop a little bit as well, but we're going to have some fun with the tools today, focusing on travel photography. I've got a collection of travel photos. Travel photography is probably my favorite thing to do. Usually not getting paid for it, but it is one of my favorite types of photography. And so I'm going to show a few different images. I kind of dug into my archives and pulled out some old photos because I thought that would be kind of fun to play with. And yeah, we're going to see what we can do with them. So here's kind of the high level things what we're going to talk about. The first one on there, the first bullet point is tips on organizing your travel images in Lightroom Classic. We're actually going to switch over to Lightroom CC, the other Lightroom for that part of it. I'm going to show you because I have much more organized in there than I do in Classic. And I'm going to give you my philosophy for organizing images. This does not, by any stretch of the imagination, mean that this is how you have to do it or the way you should do it, but it's the way that I do it. And it has worked for me for years and years and years and years and years. And I like it a lot. And I've heard from many people who have adopted this strategy that they like it too. And you can use this strategy, whether you're using Lightroom Classic, Lightroom Cloud, whether you're using Photolab, whether you're just using the Finder, whatever you like, this strategy will work. We're going to, throughout the process of doing our work today, we're going to see how to open your images from Lightroom Classic into the Nik Collection, and we're going to discover, we're going to take a look at the non-destructive workflow by going back into some images to re-edit them. So that's the plan that we've got for today. All right, so once again, we are going to be looking at travel photography. So I've got a few photos down here. I've grouped them together into people and then kind of a, let's call it architecture-ish based thing, and then scenery, landscapey type stuff. We're not gonna look at all of these. I grabbed a few extras in here just in case we somehow magically ran out of images to talk about. But I'm gonna start with people, which is honestly one of my favorite things about travel photography. I love photographing people preferably from a different culture than my own. So this is in Vietnam, this is in Hong Kong, two of my absolute favorite places in the world to visit, and both just phenomenal places for street photography. So we're gonna do those to start. This one is from a museum or art gallery rather in New York. I'll tell the story as we get to that one. This is somewhere in, I think, Connecticut, fall situation kind of a thing. Just this cool church. There's a neat story behind this and why the photo is so crooked. We're going to straighten that out. I've got the St. Louis Arch. This is a beautiful monument if you've never seen it, photographed about 1 trillion times, and I found an angle that I really liked with this. And this is actually a pretty old photo. Let's see here, 2011, shot on a 1DS Mark III with a 24-70 lens. So this is a pretty old photo. And I have actually done a gallery hanging with this image, and I'm going to take this through the conversion process to black and white and kind of try and do similar to what I did before with the gallery hanging and show you how I would treat a photo like this. And then I have a couple of landscapes. That'd be the third most common category that I would shoot if I'm out doing travel stuff, because there's always beauty in nature, and it's kind of fun to capture that and try and make a good image out of it. So let's start with people. So, well, I may go pretty dramatic, let's say with this one in the black and white. When it comes to photos like this of people, I don't want to go crazy with it. I'm not trying to create some wild, out of this world, bizarre image. I just want to make this image look better. And that, of course, is completely subjective. So that might mean just some exposure balancing, color correction, cropping, that sort of thing. But one of the things that I personally really like to do is add a little bit of what I like to call soul to the image. I feel like a lot of digital photography is so clean and sharp that you just don't really get a lot of the kind of texture and soul, again, to use that word, that you get out of film. And I want to add a little bit of that film feel to this. So typically what I do with any photo before I take it into a Nik Collection filter is run just a basic auto correct on it. So I'll hit the auto button and just see what Lightroom does. And in this case, it did a little bit of exposure shifting. We can see what it did here, pulled the highlights down a bit. So probably recovering some detail in there, pulled the shadows a touch. And this doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to like it like that, but I always do that first. I feel like it's actually ever so slightly too saturated. We have this beautiful morning light casting on him, so it's nice and warm. The light's coming from a low angle. It really is a beautiful morning. So I'm gonna just take the saturation on that just down a tiny bit. I feel like it's just a little bit too much. Not too much, just down a touch. There we go. Okay, so I'm gonna do that to start, and that's all I'm gonna do in Lightroom. Now let's take this photo and edit this in Color Effects Pro. So I could go Analog Effects Pro, and I will actually go there later, but Analog Effects Pro I feel is very much a creative film type of a look, whereas what I want to do is a much more subtle, just a general kiss of film kind of a look. So that's a raw photo, which means when I first right click on it, I have to edit a copy of it. I don't have access to the other tools because it has to render that from raw into another format. I'm going to choose that as a TIFF file because I want to be able to re-edit this photo later. We'll talk about that more in a moment. And color space, I get this question a lot. People have asked, oh, I saw you left it in sRGB. Why don't you put it in Adobe RGB or something else? Often when I'm doing demos, I just don't really pay much attention to this. But when I'm doing work for real, this decision, well, let's say, I will most likely leave this in Adobe RGB. That's where I'm most likely going to be. And if I'm going to be printing it, I'm absolutely going to be here. The thing is, if I know it's just destined for screen, then I may as well leave it in the sRGB color space. I don't know why it takes 2 clicks to get there every time. I may as well leave it in the sRGB color space because then when I do an export for screen, it's not going to go through a color conversion. But in this case, let's just pretend I might be printing this. Interesting, every time I do that, it changes the resolution the first time and then it changes it. Curious. Anyway, let's just pretend I'm going to print it. I'm going to go ahead for Adobe RGB, get that expanded color space. We'll leave it in 16 bits because why not? And we'll edit this photo. So again, what I'm looking for here is to add a subtle film look, not to do anything really dramatic, just to give it a little kiss of film. And when I first open Color Effects Pro, it's going to bring up the last effect that was applied, which happened to be the glamour glow. It's just not what I want here. So let me close that. And just in case you are seeing Color Effects Pro for the first time, let me give you a brief tour of how this tool works. Color Effects Pro is based off of a series of filters. You have on the left-hand side something called your filter library. Right now we're looking at all of the filters because it says all right there. If I click on these different subcategories, these are just groups of the different filters. So some of these will show up in multiple groups, like you might find I don't know, high key, both in portrait and in wedding, maybe not, but you'd find some of the same filters in different categories. These categories are arbitrary. This is just what somebody at DxO decided when they made this, where they belong. But if the idea being, if you are a nature photographer, odds are you're going to find the tools you want in here. Or you could just go to all. And once you're looking at any of these categories, if you put a star next to any one of these, it adds it as a favorite. So let me go, let's say colorize is not currently starred. So I'll go ahead and star colorize. And now when I look at my favorites, colorize shows up in there. If I undo the star, then it is going to remove it from that favorites list. And this can certainly be a way to quickly find the tools you're looking for. When you select one of these tools, let's just start with, let's say, bicolor filter, something really dramatic. It adds it over here on the right. And this is what we'd call a filter stack. Now it has added this bicolor tool. Okay, great. So I've got that on there and I can make all of my changes in here. So for example, change the opacity of that look. In this particular tool, I can change a color overlay that's different. But if I want to add another filter to this, if I go over here on the left and I go, okay, now let's add ink. Let's see what that does. When I select that, it has just replaced the existing tool. So if I want to do multiple tools, let's go back to that bicolor one. What I have to do is add a second filter. You see this right here. I say add filter, and that adds a new filter holder. And now I can go in here and choose, what did I do? Ink, add ink to it. And now I've got both of them, bicolor and ink in there. So this is how we stack them up. And then once you've come up with a combination that you like, if you want to save it for later, you can click on save recipe, give it a preset name, and now you're going to have that saved. So that's the essential process of how this system works. So let me just clear all of these out and start from scratch. And because I know I want a film look, there are a few different film effects categories in here. This one here is called Film Effects Modern Branded. And what's cool about this one is if we look at the drop down, you see actual named film types. So if you know, let's say you used to shoot Kodak Gold all the time and you are just nostalgic for that look, you can pull this up and this is going to very closely match what this photo would have looked like shot in Kodak Gold. And then we can go in there and start making adjustments to it. So we have a film details adjustment in here that is absolutely incredible. Just a massive amount of control in here, and I can change whatever I want. So let's see, this is feeling quite yellow. So maybe I dial some of the yellow back on that and pull some of the yellow out of that film translation. So you can just really do an incredible amount of things in here. But I want to make this easy. So I'm just going to go up here and run through the different presets. And you'll notice at the top, there's 5 of them that are labeled new. These came out in, I think it was the Nik 2.5 collection, so previous release, but these are all still relatively new. And you'll notice as well that as I roll my mouse over the presets, we're instantly seeing that change on the screen. And I don't have to select it, right? I don't have to go, what does that look like, and click it, and then go, oh, I don't like that, go back, click and drag again. You can just slowly roll your mouse up and down this list and see them change in real time, which is really, I think, really, really nice, and just makes the whole process a lot faster. So for what I would do is pretty much usually start at the top here, and just I leave that up there and go, okay, that looks, that looks pretty good. Actually, quite like that a lot. Go to the next one. Nah, too undersaturated. Don't like the way the greens are treated. Fuji Instax, way too washed out. Don't like that one. And so just basically go through it and pick something that I like. And I happen to really like this one, this Agfa Precisa 100. So I apply that, and that's it. Like, we can do a compare before and after. There's the before and after on there, but I really like the way this looks. So that's honestly, that's all I'm going to do to this image. It has that nice kind of analog-y look to it. I think it's got a beautiful look. If I zoom into 100%, take a closer look at what this looks like, we can see if we get a little bit of grain going on in here. I might want to actually add a little bit more grain. Let's add just a little bit more grain to this, take my grain per pixel size down. Incidentally, this is kind of can be a confusing slider, because it's a slider where the lower you go, the more grain you get. But if you look at the words here, it says grain per pixel. It's not a grain size slider, it's a grain per pixel. So if you have it all the way up at 500, that is effectively turned off. There's, imagine, if you will, 500 pieces of grain inside of a single pixel. Clearly you couldn't do that, but that's the idea. So it's basically gone. As I bring this down, let's break it all the way down to 1, every single pixel becomes a piece of film grain, and it just becomes very, very chunky like this. So generally what you want, well, for me, what I would want is something subtle. So I'm looking for something just to take off that digital edge, just to give it a little bit of texture to it. And I like that, so I'll go ahead and hit save on there and call it a day. And that's what I want for that image. So now let's go to another photo. Same idea. I'm going to take this one. It's a little bit dark, a little bit underexposed. If I look at the histogram here, it's definitely a little on the dark side. So let's try that auto button again and see what that does. Good. Okay, that's brightened it up a bit. Still pretty dark on the edges, but I mean, I do kind of like the shadows in there. I think I'm going to leave it as it is. I might change it inside of the filter, but let's find out. Let's go try it out. So I'm going to edit this again in Color Efex Pro one more time. We're going to go back into here, and let's see here, TIFF, and TIFF is right, Adobe RGB. And I can see there's a question coming up already about, is there a way to make this sticky? And not that I am aware of. I agree this is tedious. You do have to change that every time. Let's go ahead and click on the edit button and jump into the tool itself and see what we can do in here. So I mentioned earlier that we are bringing this into TIFF, and the reason that we're doing this into TIFF is to make this re-editable later. So the dialog has not popped up. I must have dismissed it at some point, but the first time you launch it, there will be a dialog that pops up that says, hey, guess what? You're editing a TIFF, and because you're editing a TIFF, you can re-edit this photo later. All you got to do is check the little checkbox down here, save and edit later. So you see this, save and edit later. If I turn that off, then I will not be able to edit this later. But by turning this on, it will allow me to edit this photo later on. So we'll take a look at that process in a moment here, but that is now on. So this photo is going to be re-editable. So where am I going to go? Let's start with the film look. It's already applied that last film look to it. Let's go through the different presets again. So Agfa Precisa 100, that's where it started. The Fuji one actually looks pretty good here. Actually, I quite like that Fuji Instax one. So interesting. And it's one of those things where you really do need to try these for different photos. Because remember, this Fuji Instax on the previous photo was just big, washed out nothing. It was like, it looked terrible. But here, this actually looks really good. So you never know. You got to try it out. So I kind of like that look. If I do a little before and after, it's subtle, but it's adding some contrast in there in a way that I really like. Shadows are a bit darker. Yeah, I dig it. Okay, I'm going to go with this. All right, so I've got that. I feel like my shadows over here might be a little bit too dark, so let me do this. I'm going to add another filter, and that's going to be let's go to my favorites here. bring this list a little smaller. I'm going to add levels and curves, which is a basic exposure control, but I don't want to do this exposure after the film effect. I actually want the exposure adjustment to happen before the film effect. So I'm going to take this tool right here and just drag it up before film effects, and now I'm going to do my exposure adjustment before the film conversion. So now I'm looking at what this looks like, and I want to, let's see, I want to bring up the brightness overall. Let's see, highlights up a little bit. I'm mainly looking at him, paying attention to this, and I'm also noticing that this part of the scene is getting a bit too bright, so I might have to fix that. But I'm looking mainly at my main subject there, and let's say right about there. I like that. Okay, next, let's add a vignette. I know this is too bright. I'm gonna have to deal with that. I do wanna add a vignette overall, so I'm gonna add a new filter, and let's go for vignette, which I haven't favorited. So let's go down here and find lens vignetting. There it is. I'm gonna add that as a favorite as well, make it easy to come back to. And right away, we see this very heavy vignetting around the edge. It looks quite fake, I think. It's just too much. And if I change the amount up or down, that'll make that stronger or lighter. And I'll show you the way that I like to do vignettes. I tend to make the vignette really big. So let's take it all the way up to 100 and then make the amount less. And so now I've got a very soft, very gradual vignette in there that you don't look at and think, oh, he vignetted it. I will turn that off and back on, and you see it's a very subtle change, but that's all I need. I don't need a big, huge, big heavy duty vignette, and I do not want it to be noticeable. I don't want someone to look at the photo and say, oh, you added a vignette to that. No, that would be terrible. So let's see here. We've got that vignette added. Let's next focus on this part of the image. It's just, like I said before, a little bit too bright, a little distracting. So I'm going to add another filter. I'm going to add another levels and curves, and I want to focus this just on this area here. So I'll start by just pulling the brightness down, and that's probably something like that is probably going to work. But then, of course, this is applied to the whole image. So I want to add a control point to only affect this part of the scene. So to do that, I click on Add Control Point, click on this here. And if we want to see what the control point is affecting, I can turn that on, and we'll see now. I can drag this around and see the mask of what that is affecting. Now, if you are new to control points, let me give you a brief explanation of what we're seeing here. So control point is effectively a mask, and it is a mask that is built in real time automatically based off of whatever I have clicked on, whatever the center of this control point is pointing at. So like if I go to his shirt right there, you can see that his shirt is totally masked out. It's all white. White means that that is selected. We're going to see the effect through there. Black, like we're seeing on his skin and on the sides on here, means that the image, or the effect rather, will not be affected there. So effectively, it is building a mask like you might want to paint by hand, but doing it automatically based off of the color and the exposure values of the area that I've clicked on, the area that I've dropped it on. So you can see as I drag this around how that mask gets updated in real time as I move it. So what I want to do is affect this area behind the buildings, but that area behind the buildings, let me hide the mask real quick, is not necessarily all one color or one exposure. So it's I gotta kind of find a balance in there. And the easiest way to do that is to go into the mask mode, drag this around and find what I want to affect. And that's probably actually pretty good right there. So we'll leave that there. And now as I make this effect in here, you see it's only affecting that part of the scene. And yeah, I like it. I think that's pretty good. So that is the affected photo. That's the edited one. And if I right click on this and I say show in Finder, there's the photo, it's a TIFF file. I'm going to open this in preview and show how it is that we're going to be able to edit this later. So if we look at this in preview, there's the original image and there's the affected one. And you're thinking, oh, hold on a second, why do you have two different versions of the image in preview? Well, this is something called multi-layer TIFF technology, and this is what is part of the new Nik Collection. The Nik Collection 3 allows me to save, as you saw in that checkbox, an editable file, which means that I have the original intact and I have my edited version. And what we're not seeing here in preview is there's hidden metadata in between these layers that is explaining exactly how to make this image. And what that means is if I go back into Lightroom, right click on that same photo, edit in Color Effects Pro again, and now choose Edit Original. Important, we don't want to edit, well, if you edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments, any adjustments that I had made here after the fact would get dialed into it, baked into it, and I would no longer be able to re-edit the photo. But by editing the original or editing a copy of the original, either one of these will work, it'll open up in the plugin and allow me to re-edit the filter, re-edit the image, which is just fantastic. Cancel. But you have the basic idea of what I was doing. The last effect I was going to do is add a little bit of desaturation to it, but I think we're good. Okay, next photo. This one, people / architecture all at once. Neat story behind this photo. This is in a gallery in New York City. I was shooting with, let's go back to the library. I was shooting with a Fuji X100. So this is quite a while ago. This is the original X100. This is 2011. It's another old photo. And this is actually a JPEG. Look at that, it's a JPEG. This was shooting in-camera JPEGs. You get some beautiful in-camera JPEGs out of the Fuji. And so this is already black and white. And so what that means is I really can't do a whole lot of editing to the image itself without kind of breaking it, which is fine. What I really want to do is crop the photo and straighten it out. So why is this photo so jaunty angle? Let's start with that. Well, this is one of those instances where I'm just in the art gallery, in the photo gallery, and I turn around and I see this fellow in this black suit with a white shirt, the black hair, leaning over this counter, and I just think over the display case, and I think, man, that is beautiful. That looks really, really good. That's a great photo. I should get closer because the Fuji camera has a very wide angle lens. But I can't, I mean, he's not gonna be there if I take 5 steps closer. So very quickly pick up the camera and snap the shot. One photo, didn't even manage to get the camera straight, but I grabbed the shot. So this is what I want. So now I need to correct all of this. So let's do that. Let's take this into, I'm gonna edit this in perspective effects to straighten out the angles on this. Now this is a JPEG, so I could edit the original. Don't wanna do that, don't wanna mess up my original. Definitely wanna do a copy in there. Click on edit, and it's going to duplicate that out as a new file and then bring that into perspective effects. All right, so perspective effects is all about straightening out your shot, correcting the angles. So let's start by just trying to automatically do this. There is an auto button here, auto perspective. Hit that button, and that looks pretty good, right? I mean, that looks pretty darn good there. However, look very, very closely. Look at this line right here. If you look at it next to the edge of the photo, you can tell that this one is still at a very slight angle. So the software has probably grabbed maybe this vertical line and this one. It tends to not go all the way up to the edges. I think in my experience, it tends to grab ones that are more kind of middle center to base it off of. And you know, there's a lot of good, strong vertical lines in here to base the correction off of, and it probably based it off of these, which looks great in the middle, but it leaves this edge imperfect. So I'm going to do this manually. Now, perspective effects is all about correcting the perspective, as the name implies. And so I'm going to do this entirely manually. Let me turn this on. Let's do a full reset on this. And the way that this works is I have these lines that I can reposition anywhere on the scene and then re-angle these to match the actual line that I'm trying to line it up to. So I'm going to use this outer wall, and we'll get into getting it accurate in a moment. This, yeah, we'll do that edge wall right there, that top wall, and that one there. So to do this accurately, we want to take a very close look at this and get in very close. And to do that, you simply click on the cursor, click on that little circle with the cross in it, and it automatically zooms in, automatically magnifies, and then you position that crosshair right on one of the lines, one on the edge of the line. So I'm going to use that inside edge of that wall, do the same thing down here. So important, right? Did I use the top edge? Did I use the inside edge or the outside edge last time? You don't want to get that wrong. You do want to make sure you get the right edge, get that same edge. Now let's call it up to the top on there, right about there. Again, make that nice and accurate right about there, and then do the same thing over and over again. So get this on the edge. Now you'll notice too, as I'm moving this, it can be difficult to get it exactly in place because the cursor moves so fast. Look underneath the circle. It says press shift to slow cursor. As I hold down the shift key, now as I move the cursor, I get a much more accurate, much slower movement of the cursor. So it makes it easy to get that super accurate. So to do this quickly, you basically just get it close, hold down shift, and then dial it in exactly. So let's get that all the way over here, the bottom of that wall, looking good. This one up, get it close, hold shift, dial it in. And again here, click, drag, shift, and good. I think that works pretty well. And now I click the preview button. Preview does the straightening for me, and it already had the earlier straightening, so it's just kind of added to that, and now it looks much more accurate. So now let's crop it manually. Go into the crop tool, and by default, when you do that, it's going to bring up an aspect ratio of preserve, meaning it keeps the aspect ratio that you previously had. which I don't care about the aspect ratio here, so I'm going to take that off, go unconstrained, and reposition this however I want. Now let's see here. How do I want to crop this photo? Well, I'm going to get rid of these crosshairs, this grid to start, just to kind of clean this up, make it a little easier to see. And I really like this too. I have this mask opacity slider where I can see what's being cropped out, just to really keep it from being distracting. I'm going to bring that way, way down. So now I'm really just looking at the new image. Now I know I want to crop out these people. They're definitely not part of this image here. I probably don't want to crop this photo on the wall here halfway through. So let's just go past that. I think that's going to be better. A little spot in here I might want to retouch later, something to consider. Do I want to go kind of a wide view like this? You know, it's obviously totally up to you. Now take a look at that line that I straightened. Look at how nice and straight it is against the edge of the photo. So it's very much subjective. You know, do I want to crop it like that? No, I kind of like that wall up there. And here's something else I noticed. This line here, it's very much a leading line, as is this one. I think what I would like to do is find a way to have either that line or the top line hit right into the corner of the image. I actually quite like that. I quite like it's very graphical. We've got this very geometric, maybe is the better word to use. Have this nice line that runs right into the corner there. I like that a lot. In fact, now the image, the crop is almost square. So let's just go full square. Let's force it into square, do a 1-to-1 aspect ratio, and let's see how that works. Maybe, do I make this a little bit bigger? Get a little bit more floor, pull that up. Yeah. Well, definitely don't want to get that wall or get that picture. I'm watching out for that. Maybe right about there-ish. I kind of like that. What do you guys think? I like it. I think that's pretty good. I dig that crop. So I love the leading lines. Leading lines are big for me. I kind of really enjoy that. I love having the lines running into a corner. I think that's very effective. Very, again, graphical or geometric shapes to it. I dig it. I like it. I'm going to apply that. That's my crop. Hit save, and off we go. So again, just another way to treat your images, just another perspective towards treating your photos. All right, we're going to take a short break here and take a look at the questions that are coming up and see if there's any questions that I can answer for you guys. All right, first one up. Why do you keep the resolution at 72? Okay, I just didn't want to change it for one. However, the resolution that you enter into there is completely and totally 100% irrelevant until you hit print. And at that point, you can change the resolution without affecting the image at all. Now that sounds, you're thinking, well, hold on a second. How can you change the resolution and not have it affect the image? You are not changing the total pixels in the image. Let's make the math really easy. Let's say that you have a 1000 by 1000 pixel image to start with. If your resolution is set to 100 pixels per inch, if you were to print it, you would now have a 10 by 10 inch image. However, when you look at that on screen, it is 1000 by 1000 pixels. If you then went in and changed the resolution to what did I say was 1000, and we started 100 DPI, 100 pixels per inch. Let's say I change it to 10 pixels per inch. Well, now suddenly, if I printed it, that is a 100 by 100 inch image. But if I look at it on screen, it's still 1000 by 1000 pixels. So as long as you're just looking at it on screen, the resolution is irrelevant. The kind of choices that I have in the software would be to look at the image 1-to-1, 100%, 1-to-1, pixel for pixel on screen, or fit the image to the screen. There's no, oh, show me what, if I go into soft proofing for printing, then it will simulate the size on a piece of paper. But for just editing and looking at the picture, it's irrelevant. So until print becomes part of the equation, it is 100% irrelevant what you do. So that's why I don't bother changing it, because it doesn't matter until I print. And if I'm going to print, then I would go into the print, what do you call it? The print room, the print dialog, whatever it's called, and you can choose your print resolution there, and you can determine whether the image is going to get scaled or not, and all that sort of thing. But for general editing use, completely and totally irrelevant, doesn't matter, so why bother? Next question. Like you, I do not care about the aspect ratio while cropping. Unless you're printing, aspect ratio, who cares? Well, unless you're trying to fill an Instagram frame, then aspect ratio matters. Like you, I do not care about aspect ratio while cropping. Do you know how to change the settings to not have it selected automatically? No, unfortunately, this is a common feature request to have that stay sticky. When a menu is sticky, that means that it's the way you left it last time you were there. So that would be the end goal of that. So that's what we want to do. moving on to another image that I'm going to play with in perspective effects. This photo of this old church is kind of a fun story. So as I think I said in the intro, this was shot in Connecticut, I believe. Driving down the road, beautiful old church, the white church against this beautiful background with this glorious red door. I thought, this is really pretty. I want to picture this. And so I get out to take a photo and realized pretty quickly that it's kind of on a hill. And if I want to have a non-perspective shifted photo where I'm not like pointing way up at the camera, then I need to get up really high, which I couldn't do, or get on a ladder on top of the car or something. Couldn't do that because I'm down on a hill, or I'm going to have to correct this in software. So the way that I shot this was, first of all, to hold the camera above my head as high as I could, to get the camera up as high as I could. So I was, had as little work to do in post as possible, but clearly it still wasn't quite everything. We can see the leaning in of the building here. It's not super dramatic, but clearly the camera was not up at the middle of the building. And then knowing that I was going to be doing this work in post, I know that what happens when I perspective correct, I'm gonna go ahead and get this thing open up into perspective effects while I'm talking about this. I know that when I do a lot of perspective changes, that I'm going to end up having to crop a lot of the image. So I shot this a bit wider than I really needed it. And truth be told, I should have shot it even wider still, but I didn't. And so that would give me more room to crop. And yeah, I think is that everything? Yeah, so I shot it extra wide. Oh, held the camera above my head. And the reason that it's crooked is because the camera was held above my head and I was kind of doing my best where I couldn't really see what was going on. So that's why the photo's a little bit crooked. So we'll try the auto again, but I think we're not going to get very far. Right? Actually, it's a pretty good job on here. But look at this line here. It's like, this is crooked. Wait, that's kind of straight, and that's funny. What's going on here? So here's the funny thing about this photo. Let me turn off that perspective correction I just did. If you look really closely at the top, the building is not totally straight. Look at this, especially this top part right here. There's a much bigger gap. Let's zoom in 1-to-1. There is a big gap here, much bigger gap here than here. I don't know if this part of the building is sticking out farther or if it's just closer to the roof, like this is at an angle. I can't really tell. I kind of, oh, no, it's definitely at an angle. Look at that line just above the fingers. See that line on there? It's like a whole other piece of wood. I don't know who built this roof, but it's a bit jaunty. So this is going to be fun because what's going to happen is I'm going to try and do a manual correction, but I don't know which horizontal line I'm going to use. And we're going to try a couple different things and see what happens. So let's just do it. Jump into manual perspective correction. We've seen the tool before, so I'm going to very quickly move this over these vertical lines. And these, I guess we'll start down here at the middle of the roof, these horizontal lines. So let's go in nice and close. And let's get these guys in place. So we're going to use that side of the building there. And I don't have a whole lot of room here. This is not a very long, usually you want really long lines, the longer the better. I just don't have any long lines here. I have to be careful not to try and treat the outside of this pillar as the line to use because that's not a legit part of the line. It looks like, oh, this is right here. So I can go all the way to here. So again, shift key to move slowly. Let's pan back up here and let's get up as high as we can. And that line looks pretty good along there. Okay, next. Same thing here. Where's the top of that? Let's bring that down to there and bring this up. You can tell just by the default length of these lines that the software really wants you to choose longer lines, but I don't have them, so I got to work with what I got. Let's go right about there, and let's say right about there. Okay, looking pretty good. All right, let's go to the bottom. Another interesting one. So I can't go off the bottom of this pillar because I can't see the bottom of that pillar, and who knows if it was actually the same. I'm going to go based off the bottom of the building right here and hope that that is not shifted too much over the probably a couple hundred years this has been sitting there. So let's get this into place. Somebody's about to correct me on my history. I just know it. Let's get that right about there. Correct this one. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. Okay, I could also do this off of the steps, but again, I have no way to know whether the steps are actually perpendicular to the building, so I'm not going to bother. And let's go up to the top and do the top one here. So let's see here. Actually, what do I want to base this off of? Probably, I'm going to go for this shadow line in here, that dark line in there. I think that's good. These, what do you call these, moldings could be completely off. So let's go off the crease line in there, right right there. There's that one. And there, that looks pretty good. Okay, let's zoom out. You can see the major correction that's going to happen. Hit the preview and looks pretty good, right? I mean, look at ignore the top part of the church for a moment. All of this looks fantastic, but this top part, because it was already crooked, now this is straightened out, it looks even more crooked. So I think what I'm going to do is bring this line up to the top and let's redo that based off of the crooked top of the building. And let's see where things fall. I mean, look at the difference in that. It's so funny. Okay, let's fix this based off of, I guess, that shadow line again. That's probably a good idea. So let's bring that into place. Hold the shift key down, nice and slow. Shift key down, nice and slow. Right there. There we go. Okay, zoom back out. Do a preview. I think that's better. I mean, clearly this is now shifted a little bit, right? I mean, there's only so much that we can do, but I think this is better than what we had before. It's less distracting. Okay, so we're going to apply that, and then I'm also going to have to recrop it. Now, this is where I said in the beginning how I shot it extra wide because I knew I'd be doing this major correction, and this gives me the latitude. Let's get rid of the aspect ratio. This gives me the latitude to recrop the photo with all that perspective correction. Look at all that empty space in here because of that super distortion, and get the image looking right. Now here, unfortunately, because I did not shoot wider, I should have shot wider to get a little bit more ground in here. I can't go quite as wide as I might want to go. But if I bring these in nice and tight, and I'm going to go symmetrical here, I want these to be centered. So I'm looking at my crop guidelines here, and I want those to be evenly spaced across this center tower, I guess we'll call it. So let's say right about there. Also looking at the edges, I'm going to split the difference here. I'm going to have that edge the same, that rooftop edge, the same distance from the edge of the photo. So this part of the building we're now seeing, this is not totally centered. It's kind of funny. So this rooftop is probably bigger than this rooftop. What you gonna do? Looking pretty good. So I've got a little bit of retouching work that I would have to do later on, but that's fine. I can easily handle that in Lightroom or in Photoshop or in Photolab or whatever you want. Fill that in. I'm not going to bother doing it now. But there we go. So that's that image that I want to do. So I think that is a much nicer version of that photo, and that's what I had in mind there. So from here, I could go in and do color effects to it, but we're going to move on to this photo because I really want to get into the black and white workflow. This is something I definitely want to do. Alrighty. Before I jump into that, let's jump back to the questions again. I see a couple of questions have come up while I was working away there, so let's see what we got. Can you correct all the wonky horizontal lines so they're all parallel without readjusting what you have already corrected? So if you mean to have multiple horizontal lines, like if you have an image like I just did and to correct all of those, no, there's no tool to have multiple horizontal, more than two horizontals. So you basically have a top, bottom, left, right. You can't have a center one in there. That'd be interesting, but I'm not sure. I don't think that would work because you'd end up really messing with the edges if you had, a here, like it's one thing to do this, but then if one in the middle did this at a different angle, I think that would really mess up the edges. So there's no tool to do that, no way to do that in here. If that wasn't what you're asking, then feel free to clarify the question. Can you show how to further edit in Lightroom Classic with the non-destructive workflow in Lightroom? I'm going to be doing that in just a moment here. Control points in Color Effects Pro, please show how to duplicate control points. Absolutely. Let me think, I'm not going to do that with this next photo. So let me just do that very quickly as part of the Q&A, and then we'll jump back into the demo. Let's do that with, we'll just do this photo here, which, okay, so this photo, maybe now I can save myself from earlier. I'm going to edit in Color Effects Pro, edit the original, and let's see, this should bring up the work that I had done earlier, even though it was just one filter stack. Yeah, sure enough, it did. Okay, so this one worked. You can't really tell as much because it's only one, but this is what I had intended to show earlier when I had more filters in there. Anyway, so let's add something else completely. Let's do, I'll just do something really obvious, not trying to correct the photo, but just to answer the question. I've just added levels and curves. I will add a control point to the sky. Let's say that I want to make that really, really dark. So I want to put kind of a vignette in the darker spot in the sky in there. And if I look at that control point, it is there. If I want to duplicate this exact control point, you can just hold down the Option key on the keyboard, and you notice the cursor, it's a little hard to see here, but the cursor changes just as it does in the Finder, where you get a plus on the cursor. And now as I drag this over, I have now duplicated that. So now I can make that a little bit bigger over here. Let's duplicate that down to the bottom here. Let's make that one a little bit smaller, whatever you like. So that's how you duplicate them, just Option drag to duplicate those. I think, let me see here. I can also do that with the interface here. So if I can select a control point and then hit this button there, that will duplicate it as well. And then you can position it wherever you like. So a couple different ways to go about doing that. Alrighty. And that, I believe, those are all the questions. All right, let's move on. Let me turn off my camera. This photo, again, was shot in St. Louis. This is the St. Louis Arch, the Gateway Arch, I think is the right name for that. And this is a huge, huge thing. If you've never seen this, I don't remember the numbers, but it's absolutely massive. And when you're standing at the bottom looking straight up, it's kind of cool looking. And when I shot this, I know that I looked at this scene with black and white in my eye. In fact, I might have even been looking through my camera in black and white. Well, actually, probably not. This is a Canon, so it didn't do that. So this is another old photo. 2011. Wow, I guess I shot a lot of photos in 2011. I knew that I wanted to do this in black and white. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna go into Develop, hit the Auto button, just because, once again, I think that Auto is a great place to start. Let it recover any highlights that might be needed. It looks like I already did that. Let's reset it. There's the original. Hit Auto. It's a little highlight recovery. That's good. And now let's take this into Silver FX Pro, my favorite black and white tool ever. All right, let's go ahead and edit this guy. And I know that I want to do something high contrast with lots of structure. I want to really bring out the detail in the metal in here. Here's that dialog, by the way, that I had previously dismissed and I wasn't able to show you. Good to know before working with a TIFF file, since you've imported images in a TIFF format, you have the ability to resume editing later. Just check the checkbox down here. So there you go. That's what that was. Let's open this up nice and big. And I know that I'm going to want to add a lot of contrast in here, but just in case you are not yet familiar with Silver FX Pro, let me give you a brief tour of this, and then we're going to play with some of the presets because I think that is a fantastic way to start. So unlike in Color FX Pro, where you had a series of filters on the left that you added to a filter stack on the right, in Silver FX Pro, the approach is different. You have a series of global adjustments in here that are always on. I mean, you can turn off any individual one of these, but these are all on by default. And what you're seeing on the left is simply a preset of these settings. So if I go and I click on the first preset here, underexposed EV1, we'll see the brightness has dropped and the highlights and dynamic brightness have dropped, contrast is up, and so on and so on. So we find a bunch of different controls to that. If I click on another one here, we'll see these presets have changed, or these settings have changed. So these are all different presets of these settings, just different saved versions of these settings in here. They're not actually different filters. Now in here, you have an immense amount of control. You have global controls like we're seeing here. So it says right there, global adjustment. So let me just reset this actually. Reset that back to neutral, changing brightness, something very straightforward. But I can change brightness of just the highlights or just the midtones or just the shadows. So an interesting way to make it more contrasty would be to darken the shadows and brighten the highlights and get that kind of more high contrast look going in there. And then there is specifically contrast settings where you can pump up the whites and the blacks. So I can make my whites even brighter in there if I wanted to. You have structure, which is a ton of fun that really can give you a whole lot of detail. I mean, I love what happens in the metal on here when you crank that structure way up. And look at that, it's just beautiful in there. You can do some really cool things in here with structure. Tonality protection and so on and so on. And then you get into color filters you can add on top of this. What would this photo look like if it was shot through a red filter or a green filter or a blue filter? What would that look like in here? You have film types that you can go through. So similar to the film types that we had in Color FX Pro, you have black and white film types in here. Now, I'll give you a little tip. If you are aiming to work with a film type, start here. Go neutral to begin with, total default, everything's off, and then go in and choose a film type. Because the reason that I say this is because let's say that I go in here and I make a bunch of changes and I'm just going to randomly click around and I go, oh yeah, that's okay, let's get it that way. That's the look that I want in there. Cool. Oh, now let's add a film type. Well, now it's going to completely change the image, total dramatic change. So what I advise is that you start with the default. The neutral is kind of a reset, if you will. Everything's back to neutral. And choose a film type first, and then enhance your image from there. So that's my tip for you on how to best work with these. And once you've added that film type, you can still go in and you can adjust things like the grain, the sensitivity of different channel colors, the levels and curves. There's tons and tons of control in here, but start with film. I know that film is not the first one in the list, and traditionally you work from the top down, but I'm telling you, start with film and then go back up to the top. Okay, now everything that we've talked about so far is global, but I also have these localized controls, the control points. So if let me just once again reset everything. If I grab a control point and I drop it onto the building here, I can now adjust the brightness for that selected area, the contrast, the structure. And if I open this up, you also have amplify whites, amplify blacks, fine structure, and selective colorization. So if you wanted to bring some color back into the image, you could do that. These controls are all replicated up here, but these are localized. This is applied only to that area. To see the area that it's being applied to, once again, you click on this little checkbox here to enable the mask view. So if I wanted to just adjust the arch without adjusting the sky, I might go through here, and before even making any changes to this, let's actually just reset everything. There we go. Before even making any changes, just go through and draw out a series of masks, option drag that to select it, to duplicate it, and kind of balance this around to get a nice mask that is covering the arch and not the sky. Now we can see the sky is getting lighter and lighter, but I'm going to fix that. Let's go down to the building here. Now this is such a narrow band, this could get a little bit tricky to isolate without getting like a million control points, but let's actually start at the bottom here and let's try this. Let's do that, make it a little bit bigger. Okay, so you can see I've got the arch well selected, but the background is also quite selected. So let me do this, go in and add a negative control point. Just any other control point, just click and drag it. And then, oh, sorry, let me rephrase that. We're not adding a negative control point. We are adding another control point that we will not do anything to. Negative control points are how things work in Color Effects Pro. In here, by adding a control point to this spot of the clouds, it is going to basically override anything that would have been affected by one of these other control points. Now, each one of these control points has the mask currently on. This last one that I added has the mask off. That is irrelevant to the actual work that's being done. This just allows me to visualize these, since they're all on, what's going to happen, what am I selecting with all of these turned on, or what am I affecting rather with all of these on? And this one with this off allows me to see what I'm protecting. So what I'll do is let's add another, I'm going to call it a protection control point over here to the clouds over there. And I'm going to now take the 4 active control points, the 4 that I want to affect with, and I'm going to group them together. So now I've got a group of control points. Now let's hide the mask, and anything that I do to that group of control points will affect all of them. So if I take the brightness way down, it is affecting primarily the arch and not the sky. So you can see how the sky is being protected in there. So this was how I would go in and do very meticulous control, very meticulous adjustments over different parts of the image. So with all that said, let me just reset everything, delete all the control points, and let's just start running through some of the presets. And this is kind of fun. You know, you just click on here and you can arrow down through them if you like to with your keyboard to go through the different presets. And I find these presets a great way to get inspiration. And it's just remarkable in black and white, the differences that you'll find. Like this one, the sky is completely gone, but this one, suddenly the sky is back with a vengeance. It's phenomenal how different these can be. And because of that, I really do encourage going through the presets just to see what they look like, see what can be done in here, and just to get different ideas of what you might want to do to the photo. So as you're going through here, eventually you might find something that you really like. And I know I've got one coming up, number 24. There it is. And you know, you look at this, you go, oh, that's cool, right? I mean, look at the sky is all dark and the clouds are popping through, and I got some great texture on the metal, and this is awesome. And oops, do you notice what's wrong with the photo? Look at all these sensor spots everywhere here. It's hideous. My sensor was filthy. And I guess I was shooting stop down, so I had a big range of focus. I mean, I clearly was. You can see this is in focus. That's quite close, as is this all the way out there. So that's That's awful. Now, two different approaches. I can go ahead and continue my work and then go ahead back in Lightroom, retouch all those sensor spots on the affected image. But the problem with that is, let's just say that I end up going with something really grainy. Let's see here, go back to my film effects, grain per pixel. Let's say that I do a huge amount of grain to the photo. Now, as I start retouching, you might start to see some of that retouching pattern over these sensor spots. So I would rather do the retouching before I get into here. But let's just say, for the sake of the demo, that I've just done all this work and I've just put a whole bunch of time into this and I love the way this looks, and then I realize it and I'm going, wait a second, if I cancel out of here, I'm going to lose everything that I just did. Well, you can save this as a preset. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. Save this out as a preset. Let's go down to custom in here and add a new one, and I'm going to call this mine, and save that. So now I've got my own custom preset in here that I can come back to. Now I'm just going to go ahead and cancel this. Let's cancel out of here, and I'm just going to get rid of this one that the TIFF that I made. I'm going to go back to the raw photo and I'm going to retouch this. Okay, so I know somewhere down at the bottom, see there they are. You can kind of see, they're kind of hard to see, but they're there. They're kind of hard to see. But if you're not familiar with this feature in Lightroom, when you go into the retouching, that's this guy right here, you'll see down here there is a button that says visualize spots. Incidentally, if this toolbar is missing, it's called, here we go, view toolbar, show or hide toolbar. So let's bring that back. And if I click on visualize spots, this is one of the coolest tools in here. It just does this kind of inverted high contrast edge detect view that shows you very quickly where your spots are. All those little rings are spots. See, kind of hard to see, really easy to see. So you can even do your retouching while you're in this mode. So I'm in the healing mode, that's where I want to be. I can change the size of this retouching brush by scrolling my mouse. So I'm going to make the ring, the inner ring, just a little bit bigger than the spot. Click on that and away we go. And so I'm just going to do this very quickly. I'm not going to be super meticulous about it. I'm going to do very quickly over these, and let's correct some of these guys and look for some more of those things. If you see, okay, here's an interesting, oh, here, even better. All right, so there's a spot clearly. What is that? Is that a spot? What is that? Well, turn off visualization and look at it. Oh, it's a scratch. Look at that, it's a scratch in the metal. Okay, well, let's get rid of the scratch. Let's get rid of that. Boom, done. Occasionally toggle this on and off to make sure that you aren't, should make that a little bit bigger. Let's delete that and draw a line over it. There we go, that's better. Occasionally toggle this on and off to see if it's how it's looking. But here's some more, look at these rings, these little donut rings are like cells. You can easily see them and wipe them out. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and do that. Now, there's more in here, there's more over here that I could come back to. We'll do a couple more in here. I'm sure there's more, but that's the idea. So we visualize those spots and do that. So now I've just created, zoom back out. Now I've just done a level of work to this photo as a raw file in Lightroom. Now when I go in, let's click done. Now when I go into my filter, edit in, and what we're doing, Silver Effects Pro. Now, this is going to render out a copy with the Lightroom adjustments. And that means, of course, that all of those corrections are going to be baked into the file. So I'll open this guy up and apply the preset that I had just created, which is now under custom. Save that. And look at that, all the spots are gone. I mean, there might be some more in there that I missed, but there's the idea is that I have fixed all the spots in Lightroom, come back into here and reapply the work that I just did. Hit save, and off we go. Now, that is the effective complete workflow. That is what I would do, and then send this off to print. So at this point, if you're going to print this, you might want to take it into Photoshop to do the print module in Photoshop. The print controls in there are much more powerful than they are in Lightroom. So you probably would do that to print. But that is effectively the workflow that I would do. Now, if you decide at this point that you do want to make more corrections in Lightroom, you can do that as well. So for example, let's say that I want to add a little vignette on top of all of this. Here we go, post crop vignette. Make it a little bit darker around the edges. Maybe make this a little bit less round, a little bit more round, less round, more round, there we go. I can do this in here and make those changes, and that's totally fine. But let's do something really obvious. This is not how I'd leave it, but I just want to leave it here just to prove a point. I've added this into here, but I decide that I want to change my black and white. Well, remember if I go back in here and edit this in Silver FX Pro, remember I had that checkbox enabled to allow me to re-edit the photo. So I'm gonna go ahead and edit the original, open this up. We're going to see that black and white photo without the vignette applied, with all of my corrections already applied into it. So there's everything that I'd done before. The vignette is missing. So now I go in here and I say, let's see here. Let me change the grain. See, I made it too grainy. Let's bring the grainy up. And I go, okay, that's what I wanted. Now I'm gonna hit save, and it's gonna bring it back, and we're gonna find out if Adobe has fixed a bug or not. We should see the vignette reapplied on top of that. There was a bug in Lightroom Classic. Let's see if it's back there, and they have not fixed the bug. So there's currently a bug in Lightroom where it removes that effect that you had done. What you can now do is go back into your history and reapply that from the post-crop vignette amount. It reapplies that on top of the effect that you just did, and now I can go in and recorrect that a little bit. Another way that you could do that if you had a whole bunch of effects would be to duplicate the image and then copy and paste the look. But yeah, that is a bug. I've confirmed that with Adobe, and I'm quite disappointed that has not yet been fixed, but there you go. So that is a known bug in Adobe Lightroom Classic, so watch out for that. But there we go. That's what I wanted to show you. So let's jump over to the questions again and see if there's anything I want to address, and then we're gonna wrap this thing up. And then what are considerations between saving TIFF versus PSD? I usually start my process in DxO for the prime noise reduction and lens corrections. Excellent. Okay, so when you're coming out of Lightroom Classic, as we are here, then if you're going from Lightroom straight to the filters, then you want to do the TIFF because that gives you the non-destructive. If, however, you're going to go through Photoshop, you're going to open the file as an image in Photoshop, or even as a raw image in Photoshop as a smart object, which you would do by right-clicking and choosing edit in, open a smart object in Photoshop. And then it is going to be a PSD file, but because you're doing it as a smart object, you will have that infinite editability in the Photoshop side. So this whole multi-page TIFF format, this whole multi-page TIFF idea is something that allows you to re-edit your photo bypassing Photoshop. You can just do this in Lightroom, but you do still have more flexibility by sending it to Photoshop, but you have to go through those extra steps of going into Photoshop, doing the work there, and coming back again. So it really is just a workflow issue. What do you prefer to do? It's just totally up to you. So those are the differences there. But from Lightroom, you want it to be a TIFF, so you get that multi-page TIFF. If you're sending it to Photoshop, it's going to be a PSD regardless, and then off you go. Okay. I do believe that was it. That is all the questions. So that's it, everybody. I think that's everything. Thanks, everybody, for your time today. That was super awesome. I appreciate all of you being here today. And I think we're going to wrap it up. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks for the next show, which I don't remember what it is right now, but it's coming up in a couple of weeks, and it's going to be awesome. PhotoJoseph.com/DxO. You'll find the link to sign up for that. Take care, everybody. Bye.